Today we're going to compare Unmatched, Tales to Amaze, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with Marvel Champions. So sometimes you just want a game that you can play by yourself, and they both have solo mode, and that's what we're going to be looking into. And I think you might be surprised which game comes out ahead in the categories that matter most. So we're going to go through this chronologically, starting with the setup. The Tales to Amaze setup is actually pretty easy, but you'll notice that I didn't use the entire box when I showed that in the beginning, because if you move the box sideways or upside down, all the pieces are going to get mixed around. So, the box can be a little hard to navigate. You have the 4 hero decks, you have the 2 villain decks, and then all of the minion cards spread in there. And then you're going to have 8 minion tokens and 8 health dials for each of them. So finding them in the box gets a little tricky. And then you have to refresh your memory on the rules because there's a bunch of different cards as well. So you'll need the player. You really don't need the player 1, 2, 3, 4 card, but you'll need the turn order cards. And if you're playing on the Mothman board, you'll need the bridges. Certain minions have tokens, and then like usual in Unmatched, you'll also have different pieces that you'll need for different heroes. So for example, as you saw there, Nikola Tesla has the coils, and so getting all that out on the board isn't that tough. You will need to find the heroes and, like I said, the minion tokens, put them on the correct spaces. But once you have that all done, you're pretty much ready to go. Setup for Marvel Champions is pretty straightforward. There's health dials, but they're not really specific to any hero that you're using. You'll need to pull out a lot of different cards. So the objectives, the hero, the main schemes, and then you have to put the objective into the encounter deck. You'll also have these tokens, and much like Tales to Amaze, you have the stunned cards, which are similar to the initiative cards, and then all of these tokens, which is a little brutal. And then I think the worst part of the setup is the fact that each hero cards deck is made up of 3 different components. So you're going to have some basic cards. You're also going to have kind of a personality type, which might be like leadership. And then you're going to have like the 15 cards from the heroes. So, it's fun on the deck building side of it. But in terms of setup, I would say Tales to Amaze is a little bit easier. But since we're talking about the decks of cards, it is interesting. I think that Marvel's Champion has that cool feature that you can actually build a deck of cards. Now, unlike TCG games, I do think it's limiting in some sense. So you have to use one hero, so you can't mix and match within the hero. And then I think there's about 4 personality types, and you can only choose one personality type and the cards that go in that range. So if you only have one game set, you really don't have many options for deck building. So, and they're not easy to buy, the Marvel Champion sets. A lot of them are discontinued. So it takes a little bit of the fun away from that. And then there's basic cards. Again, though, there's not many basic cards in just the one set. So that's what's going on the Marvel Champion side with the different decks. Now on Tales to Amaze, prepping the deck is easy. You just pick your one character and you have that deck. And similarly, the villains have one deck and the minions have a deck. So there's really no choice to that. And I should say, too, on Marvel's Champion, the encounter deck, which the enemy plays, also has a couple different components as well. So they have like a side scheme or something where you can pick those into the deck as well. So there's a lot that can be changed up. In Tales to Amaze, you only get the one deck. However, I think what's really cool is that almost all the different fighters from all the different sets can kind of be interweaved into Tales to Amaze. So you don't just have to play those 4 characters. Now, we know that there's some characters that are kind of broke with it. Loki, probably the most known. Black Panther can be a tough one to play with Tales to Amaze. But I think overall, if you want that variety that you can get with Marvel's Champions, you can also get that with Tales to Amaze and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by playing new fighters. And unlike Marvel Champions, these games aren't out of stock. All these heroes are accessible, and I think that gives you a lot more hours of fun of trying these new characters, and they're not stopping. There's always new characters being released. So I would say for the category of the card decks, surprisingly, it's going to be a tie because you have the deck building, which is awesome. From Marvel's Champion, but the amount of choices that you have to play with Tales to Amaze is upwards of almost 100 by this point. So for that reason, I'm calling it a tie on the different card decks. Now we get to the next category, which is how much space needs to be used. And you can see here from the overhead shot, you have a very big board. Kind of clunky. The board is not stable. It's in quarter pieces, so you could not use it on a train, put it on your lap. And then next to the board, you need spaces for the health dials and the decks of cards. But when we look at Marvel Champions, the size of this coffee table I used, as you can see from an associated picture, is the exact size of the board. So for the most part, with Marvel's Champion, yes, this is what it looks like when the initial setup is complete. You can definitely fit it in the same size as Tales to Amaze with the board. But as we're going to see later on in the video when this game nears completion, you can barely fit everything onto the coffee table. And so it still even though it's just a card game, it still takes a lot of space. But I mean, very obviously, because of needing space outside of the board, Tales to Amaze definitely uses more space than Marvel's Champion. And I think the cool part with Marvel's Champion, when we're talking space used, I think, the ability to travel with it. Tales to Amaze, it's just, like I said, this box. But with Marvel's Champion, you don't need to bring the box with you. You can just bring a stack of cards and those tokens, and you can put the tokens in a little baggie or something. So I would give the category of space used to Marvel's Champion is definitely the better one for that. The next category we're going to look at is turn order. And if you're coming from the Marvel's Champion perspective, you're going to be like, oh, how is that even a category? Because for Marvel's Champion, it is just very straightforward. The heroes go and then the villain goes. The hero goes, the villain goes, and it is just extremely straightforward. But for Tales to Amaze, I think there's a cool little function here, and you can see from the overhead, there's what's called initiative cards. And so you're going to have each player, if you are doing co-op, but if you're playing solo, you'll have player 1, and then you're going to have the minion will have a card, the villain will have a card, and the board will have a card. So you never know where you're going to end up. And I think it's kind of cool that sometimes the player 1 goes first, sometimes player 1 goes last, and sometimes you can go last and then first on the next turn, so you get to go back to back. And each time you're shuffling the cards, so it's random as to who is going to go first in that turn. And I just think that's kind of a neat little function because it does change the strategy of the game. You don't know in the next round when you're going to go. And much like I said, you could go last and then first. You could also go first, and so the villains all go last, the minion goes last, and then you shuffle the deck, and then the villains and minions go first. And so you're just trying to fortify, and you're using all your defensive cards. So I would say the initiatives being shuffled in random order is probably the most exciting part of the Tales to Amaze game, and really good design on that end. Whereas on Marvel's Champion, it's just very status quo, and it flip-flops every other turn. So for that reason, Tales to Amaze wins the category of turn order. So the next category we're going to focus on is the offensive turn, the hero's turn, whatever you want to call it. And in Unmatched, usually it's a player versus player. And so you're kind of moving around the board, trying to get into the right position. With Tales to Amaze, you still need to do the same thing. It's just that the defense has its rules. So, in this example of using Tesla, I used a ranged fighter. So to be able to attack one of the opponents, to be able to attack one of the villains, I will need to get close to them. So in my first turn, I'm able to move. I draw a card because I moved, and now I am within range of the Martian invader. So I attack the Martian invader, I read up the cards, and follow through on those aspects. So in this situation, then I have the choice of, do I discharge a coil? I could make the value 5. Their defense is 2. There is an effect on theirs, but I haven't triggered that effect yet. And then there's an after combat effect as well. So, I'm able to do damage on that first turn. And overall, it's a pretty fun first offensive turn. But it's over very quickly. And I think that's, in a PvP style, you're always wondering what the opponent is going to do next. So you have a strategy that you're constantly conjuring up. And in Marvel's Champion, same thing. You're constantly going through that strategy. But I think once your offensive turn is over, now you're just going through the motions of what the defense automatically does. And there's as we're going to see when we judge the offensive side of things, there's just much more of the following the rules. So we're going to see here on the Marvel's Champion side with an offensive turn, you have five cards, and a lot of this is going to be, similar to other trading card games or whatnot. The bottom left there, bottom right-hand side of the screen, you'll see my 5 cards that I drew. And on the left-hand bottom side is the amount that I can pay, and in the top left is the amount the card costs. So there's always that decision making of, do I want to put this card into play? It'll cost this much. So if I use these 3 cards, and I think that's a really fun part of the game, deciding, what to do there. You'll also notice Black Panther there. Another decision you have is whether you want the hero to be playing or its alter ego. And that can be really fun as well, because the alter ego can heal, whereas the hero can, thwart the enemy, attack the enemy, or defend. And then there's something called event cards, so that's kind of cool. You put them in play, and then they can trigger. You have support cards, you have allies, and I said event cards, you put them into play. Only with Black Panther, usually event cards have to be played in the moment, but you also have these support cards like Avengers Mansion, where, they give you extra little power. It costs 4, but if you can put them into play early in the game, it's great. So all around, it's just the offensive turns have a lot more strategy to them, and they're generally just more fun, as you figure out how to play the 5 cards that you have. You might also get to draw more cards throughout your turn. You're wondering whether you should use the supports or not, or when you should use them. So yeah, a lot more components to that compared to in Unmatched. At most, you're only going to play, there is gain in action, Bruce Lee and stuff, but it's just much more methodical of you do one of 2 actions on your turn, you move, then you draw a card, and then you attack once. So really only 2 things going on, either 2 movements and nothing really happens on the turn, or a movement and an action, or 2 attacks. So overall, I think the category definitely goes to, for offensive turn, Marvel's Champion, as there's just so much more going on, especially as you get later in the game. So the flip side of the coin is defense. So we're watching here playing defense in Tales to Amaze. You can't use the red or the yellow cards. You can only use the purple versatile or the blue defensive cards. So you don't have too many options of what you can defend with. You also have the choice of not defending at all. So there's not much to like think about. And if you have the lead in playing defense, if you already have more health than the villain, then it might even behoove you to not defend on a certain turn. So overall, there's just not too much on the defensive side. I also just wanted to point out there that in both games, a little bit of a sidebar here, there is a lot that you have to remember to do. So you'll see there, I had forgotten at the end of my turn on offense to have flipped the coil over. You get to flip one coil at the end of your turn. So, the same thing happens in Marvel Champion, I think a whole lot more. So you'll see here while playing defense, I forget to draw an encounter card. So what makes it really tricky is that you draw an encounter card when the opposing player, the villain, attacks you or schemes. And on the bottom right-hand corner, there's an extra boost value for how much. And then you draw an encounter card for what the encounter card really is. So I think it would be more beneficial if they were two separate things. You wouldn't forget them as much. Also, with all of the elements out on the board, you might forget to tap a card, which means that you can't use it that round and you turn it sideways. You might forget that they have the villain has its own minion attached to it, so it can get a little tricky, but I think that goes for both and it's more of just a sidebar. So back to the category we're talking about, and that is the enemy play. So I think what really keeps it fresh here is that there's a scheme and an attack going on by the villain. And you got to balance both, because if the scheme explodes, if you hit too much points on the scheme, so the thwarting is what gets rid of the scheme, or if the villain attacks you and you lose too much health, you die. So you're constantly trying to balance out the two so that never gets out of hand. And then from there, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made, because all of the cards that you have that you might utilize are both for offense and defense. And then furthermore, you have your alter ego hero. And once you exhaust them on a turn, so if you're playing defense and you decide to defend, then you cannot use them on offense to thwart or attack. So I think there's just a lot more symbiosis on the defensive side and the enemy play, where it's going to affect your offensive game and you're just a lot more engaged in those turns. So overall, on the defensive play, we are also giving the nod to Marvel's Champions as the winner of the category. I just think the defensive gameplay is just a little stronger. A lot more to think about. You never feel like, oh, I can't wait for my turn again. And that's a little bit of the weird thing on Tales to Amaze. I do get to the feeling of, oh, I wish it was my turn. When, in Marvel's Champion, it's always your turn. So let's talk directions. In Tales to Amaze Unmatched, the rules basically follow a hero versus hero PvP style Unmatched rule set. And there's only a few basic rules in Unmatched. I mean, the biggest one is 2 actions per turn. And in an action, you can either maneuver, scheme, or attack. And then from there, you read your hero's card, follow its special ability, follow its movement value. And that's pretty much it. What Tales to Amaze, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles adds in, probably what I would consider a special ability for the villain. So the bridges in the Mothman, the invaders for the Martian invaders. There's the initiatives that get brought in. And you have to figure out what's going on with which minions you pick. And certainly the auto rules that we talk about with movement, that, the villains, if they're not next to you, then they can move 3 spaces next to you. And if they can't move at all, you raise the scheme. So there's a little bit of extra stuff to learn. But, I mean, this is the rules. It's not many on the hero side of things. And then on the... the uniqueness of Tales to Amaze, there's a few pages to it, but it's not tricky that much. So just a few pages on player turns and that sort of thing. Whereas Marvel Champions has 2 different direction books, a learn to play and a rules reference. And the Learn to Play is 24 pages long, and it's just very heavy on rules. And just trying to play it for the first time is really tricky. And then when you are playing it, the cards have a lot of dense information with terminology that you might not be comfortable with. And at that point, there's 24 pages of definitions. So, what are replacement effects, and, half a page on resources, different icons for the side schemes, ownership and control. And then, you go to a word like peril or nemesis. Well, it's not under there. It's under keywords. So now I have to go to keywords and look for that. And so what does it mean to be engaged? What does it mean? I got sidetracked looking for the keywords. K is after I. So yeah, there's definitions within definitions. So there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 keywords: guard, overcurl, peril. I don't even know what peril means. While a player is resolving a card with this keyword, that player cannot consult other players. Interesting. So that would be for the co-op version. And so that's what I'm saying. You're still like kind of learning new things, and I've not seen the word peril come into any of my cards. So that's why it's so interesting. So overall, I would say it is a lot harder to learn Marvel's Champion, just the beginning, the setup, how the card decks work for card building. And then on the card effects, you have to constantly check the rules reference. And so you could be playing for like the 8th or 9th time, or maybe even the 30th time, and you're constantly, checking the rules to make sure that you're following them. They both have a golden rule of sorts too. Let's see, where is Marvel Champions golden rule here? And that's the thing, even finding it within 48 pages. But basically it'll say that whatever the worst outcome is for you, then that is the option that you should take. So sometimes you give up looking for the rule answer, and you're just like, well, I'll take the worst thing that can happen. And I honestly can't find it in the rules right now. Whereas Tales to Amaze, again, it's much more straightforward and kind of simpler. And I think that's what you'll see between the two games. If you just want a simple game, Tales to Amaze works for that. Whereas if you want something a little more complex, Marvel's Champion is good for that. And so on directions, the winner is Tales to Amaze. Much easier directions, much smoother and quicker gameplay, getting right into it. And if you've played Unmatched before, it's even simpler. So for that reason, we give Tales to Amaze the winner on directions. Now we go into the kind of category that wraps up the play style, and that is decision making and strategy. So like I mentioned, I think that there is a lot of extra strategy on the turn order here. Figuring out, not knowing what will happen next gives a little bit of, a slight edge on the beginning of the strategy and the decision making. But having played, these two games side by side in the same week, I didn't have a great experience playing as one person. So I know the point of this video is just solo play with one character. I will say I played with two characters in Tales to Amaze, and it amplified the amount of strategy and planning to a whole different degree. And so the caveat in both these categories and the video is that I do think that there's so much more strategy when you play Tales to Amaze with two characters, because then there's 2 minions on the board and a villain. So you now have 5 characters on the board rather than just 3. And so that helps out the decision making big time. But when it's just one player, you can stay away from the minion for the most part or draw them in. And then same thing with the villain. So the other part of the game that makes Unmatched so unique is that there's a board and there's movement. That is very rare for a card game. And in PvP style Unmatched, it makes it so fun because there's this delicate dance between you and your opponent. And unfortunately with Tales to Amaze, it just does not hold up because you have to have some way for the villain to decide how to move. And I think maybe they should build that into the cards somehow, because the rule is if they can get to you within 3 spaces, then they can attack you. If they're further away from that, they just sit still, but the scheme goes up 1. And similar to Marvel's Champion, if as the scheme escalates, it's supposed to get harder. And not only is it supposed to get harder, but it's supposed to eventually, beat you. But when you're only playing with one person, you can stay away from the villain, avoid attack. The scheme doesn't go up very high, and it's just not very threatening. And again, there's no strategy to it because you know what the opponent is supposed to do on movement. And you never know in a PvP who's going to move and how they're going to move. So I think that takes away so much strategy from Tales to Amaze. And even more so when I was playing with Nikola Tesla, who's ranged, the ranges are never bigger than, I want to say, 4 spaces. And so there's no way that you can get into a situation where you're 4 spaces away and the opponent won't get you. And same thing when you're attacking an opponent as a melee fighter and you're adjacent. You're always going to then be in range of the opponent. So you decide, do you want to run away and not be in range? But then you can't attack them, so there's no point in doing that. Because you can exhaust the villain. So in PvP Unmatched, you can exhaust your opponent's cards. So running away could be a good strategy. You might want to run away while you collect more cards. And that strategy just doesn't hold up in Tales to Amaze and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So I think one of the best elements of Unmatched, which is the board, doesn't hold up in solo play. And it's, again, in 2-player, it's a little better because now you have 3 villains that you're trying to get away from and that sort of thing. So there's just not a terrible amount of decision making there. And you can see towards the end of the game, when I was playing as Tesla, I had a huge advantage. I had cards that I knew if I stored up my coils, I could attack for 7 and win the game in 2 turns. And so once I saw that with the cards in my hand, it just was pretty straightforward. And in a few turns, I had already killed the Martian invaders. So overall, I didn't really employ a lot of strategy in that game. It felt like it was a lot of setup for very little payoff. I kept playing against the minion, but it's not really designed to only have the minion on the board because you take out the initiative cards for the Martian invader, and there was just not much left to it at that point. So the decision making in Marvel Champions, we'll see here. I already alluded to it, just figuring out which cards to play and which ones you have to discard. Right off the bat, a lot of decision making that goes on there. The balancing act between thwarting and defending, attacking, and hoping to avoid the schemes is a really fun component. There's also side schemes where you can't touch the main scheme while they're in play, or you end up having to put an extra token on the main scheme until you are able to kill the side scheme. Same thing with the minions. So there's a lot of strategy on what to play. There's also the long-term strategy on getting cards onto the board that you're going to want to use later in the game. And again, in PvP Unmatched, there's a lot of that strategy of like, what do I need to do early in the game versus late in the game? And that pertains to both hoarding cards and where to be on the board. But like I said, without needing to use the board action much, there isn't as much of that short-term versus late-term strategical thinking. So just a lot more happening here on the Marvel's Champion board. And so for that reason, probably not surprising after the offensive and defensive rankings, I would say that Marvel's Champion wins on the strategy aspect. I will say, though, there is room, for improvement from Tales to Amaze and TMNT, and that is doing the movement in a way that's not so regimented. So whether that's, rolling dice, things like that, I think that'll really help out. So we're going to wrap everything up here with a summary, but before we do, we have the cleanup phase. So you had a fun time playing, but now you have to clean up, and that, it matters a little bit. Cleanup for Tales to Amaze, not hard at all. You don't have to mix any of the decks together. You just have your minion, you have your villain, and you have your hero decks. You put them back in the box. You clean up some of the blob tokens, make sure the initiatives are all together, put it in the box, and you're pretty much done. So there's just not much to clean up, and Tales to Amaze is definitely going to win cleanup because, as we talked about in the deck building, if you don't prep your cards for the next game with Marvel's Champion, it's going to be a mess. So you have to sort out all the different types of cards from each deck. So again, like I said, you're going to have the obligation card in the enemy deck. You got to pull that out. You have to pull the nemesis cards that you might end up putting in. They belong to the hero. They end up into the encounter deck. You want to put the villain in a separate category as from the schemy category. And then on the hero side, you'll see there at the bottom, you have the hero on the left, you have the personality type in the middle, and then the basic cards there in gray on the right-hand side. So all in all, it is definitely a little bit harder to clean this up. All those little tokens, they fall everywhere. Got to make sure your dog doesn't eat them. And, even then when you do play next time, if you want to change out your hero or personality type, it can be a little frustrating. So as I mentioned, Tales to Amaze definitely wins on the cleanup category. So, we take a look at the different categories, and Tales to Amaze wins on simplicity. It might use a little more space, but the directions are easier, the setup is easier, the cleanup is easier. Now, and honestly, if you're just playing as one character, the duration is shorter. You can play in 10 to 15 minutes on Tales to Amaze. Now, when you introduce a second character, that time balloons up to over an hour. Whereas Marvel's Champion, it's a solid 30 minutes to 45 minutes of constant thinking and playing. But the categories that Marvel Champions wins are the ones that most people are looking for, and that is kind of excitement and strategy. And so my favorite game is PvP, one-on-one, hero versus hero in Unmatched. But when you're playing by yourself, Marvel's Champion definitely surpasses Tales to Amaze. Now, I will say this. Tales to Amaze is kind of just an appendix, an addition to the Unmatched world, and it's great because if you don't have a friend to play with, it's nice to be able to bring out Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Tales to Amaze and get your Unmatched fixed. Whereas Marvel's Champion is designed for either solo play or co-op. And so we should expect Marvel's Champion to be a better solo game. And in terms of the game, Marvel's Champion is definitely the better solo game. So if you've played Marvel's Champion and you like it, I recommend checking out Unmatched, especially if you have a friend where you can play PvP, get some of the Battle of Legends. It'll be a lot of fun. And if you enjoy Unmatched and you enjoy Tales to Amaze and you're looking for something more, but you've played through a couple of the different heroes and that's not enough, check out Marvel's Champions. It's kind of fun. I started with Unmatched and now I'm playing Marvel's Champions as well. And I think both games are fun in a different way. So I hope this helped you learn about the two different games in a comparison sort of way. And thanks for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe to this video, like this channel. I think I got that backwards, but that's the point. So if you can subscribe, it means a lot. It helps us keep doing content. And hope you keep watching, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.